Hello guys, and welcome to a new Broken Arrow video today by me, Vulcan. In this video I wanted to do a sort of tutorial on all of the infantry units available in Broken Arrow, go through them, talk about what they are used for, and whether or not they are good or not so good at their role. So I'm just going to be going through it in order. It looks like all of the Russians first, and then we'll be doing all of the US. If you want to check out a specific nation, I'll make sure to leave a timestamp for the US ones if you just want to check those out. But let's start here with the Desarniki. So it's a 10-man squad, pretty solid squad, because they have a lot of men. They also have AK-74s and the PK-PM. The PK-PM doesn't have that much damage, but the AK-74 is like matching it, and this is actually a pretty good rifle. So they can overwhelm at the 400 meter range pretty nicely. They do have an RPG-7V, but this is a little bit lackluster due to its 500mm of penetration, and you only get one launcher with 6 rounds. So don't rely on it for anti-tank. They are really there to just overwhelm enemy infantry squads at sort of medium range. But otherwise, solid for bringing in something like a BTRD or a BTRD spreader. I really like it for that combination. Then we have the VDV AGS-30. They are a dual grenade launcher squad. So they've got 2 of these AGS-30s, which have 30mm of explosive damage penetration and 1.5 damage. The nice way to remember this is the AGS-30 has 30mm of penetration, whilst the AGS-40 has 40mm of penetration. So this one a little bit weaker than the AGS-40, but it is the same as the AGS-17 in stats as far as I can remember, but we'll get to those later. Regardless, solid squad for killing enemy infantry, decent for attacking light vehicles, but will struggle against, slightly more armoured light vehicles. Then we have the VDV Dush, a relatively overlooked squad. It is pretty cheap, and it comes with 2 RPGs. So can definitely overwhelm even heavier targets. If you can get 2 of these in position, one either side of a heavy tank or something, then you're going to be hitting it quite frequently in the soft armor. And that's how I would use these, run them forwards in groups, then split them if you need to deal with armored targets, otherwise keep them together to overwhelm enemy infantry, because they still have the good AK-74 RMO. Then we have the VDV Igla. These guys are a bit lackluster for a man-pad squad. They are pretty good at fighting enemy infantry, but the use of these is to kill helicopters mostly, right? And the fact you only get 3 rounds for the Igla S is very, very lackluster compared to other squads like the Verba, which I think gets 6. Yeah, that gets 6 ammo. So yeah, make sure you keep them resupplied. Otherwise, yeah, just pick something else, generally speaking. VDV Cornet, actually probably one of the strongest HGM squads in the game. This thing is pretty nuts. It comes with 1000mm of explosive damage by default with 1600m range, but if you upgrade it to the Cornet M, it gets 1800m range, which is longer than the TOW 2, with 1200 explosive damage penetration. And these hitting like even the front armor of a tank is going to do some serious damage, like even the highest level tanks like an M1A2 Set B3 or something like that. So yeah, they're definitely worth using, but make sure you're keeping them at range, because they do have a minimum range of 200 meters. So if a tank gets close to them, they can't fire back, and then they get overwhelmed. So the idea of these is to kind of whittle down smoke charges and APS charges of enemy tanks, and then once they have done so, or if your opponent's slow on the smoke, the second round almost always gets through and does plenty of damage. VDV Metis M. I've struggled to make good use of these, but I feel like there's a use case potentially for the Metis M1 variant of these guys. I feel like the standard Metis M variant is lackluster. You can use it to kind of take on enemy infantry at the 400 meter range, and then just have the Metis M as like a pseudo launcher, much like the VDV Dush, except the VDV Dush have 2 RPGs and this only has like 1 Metis M, for example. But the Metis M1 variant is kind of interesting because you get 3 now of the AK-74 RMOs, and you get the cord, so you technically have more anti-infantry damage. And then you also have a Metis M1, which has slightly longer range and more penetration. So yeah, it's an interesting unit. Just bear in mind this cord can't be used on the move. So yeah, that's something to make sure you know about. This stop symbol here next to the name tells you whether or not a unit has to be stationary in order to fire. So for example, the assault rifle, it's not there, but the corded is. So that basically tells you if it can fire on the move or not. Obviously this big chonker cannot be fired on the move. Then we have the VDV Razvedka. These are an okay recon squad, pretty standard honestly. Only 1750 optics, it's not ideal, but you know, they can fight in decent numbers. Like if you have 2 or 3 of these squads together, they will do a decent amount of damage at like the 300 meter range against enemy infantry, and they also have the AT weapon here, the RPG-73. Just bear in mind it is pretty short range, 300 meter range on this as well, 650 millimeters of explosive damage penetration. Then we have the VDV snipers. So these are just a standard sniper squad with the 2000 optics. One thing to note is if you hover over a lot of these things, it will tell you like what they mean and what they do. So for example, with the optics, you can see that the snipers actually have a ground range optics and a low altitude range optics, which is basically for if they're standing in a high-rise building. So everything basically can see at a higher altitude further. And you know, obviously it's kind of semi-realistic, but the idea with the snipers is that you can really benefit from 2,500 meters if you get them to the top of a high rise. Then we have, the SVD and the T5000. They're okay. I prefer suppressed loadouts just so they don't reveal themselves by accident if you happen to forget to turn on hold fire, which is generally what you'll do with snipers like this unless you're using anti-material rifles. Also, one thing to note, I'm pretty sure the VDV sniper is the only unit in the VDV tab that has a laser. So that is something you're going to want to make use of potentially. So just bear that in mind. But moving on to the VDV Spetsnaz. VDV Spetsnaz are an interesting one because you can either have them in like an AT loadout or an anti-infantry loadout. The Burr is 60 millimeters of penetration, so it can get through like really light targets, but it's going to struggle. When I'm saying light targets, I mean like vehicles. It can also fire those technically at helicopters, but helicopters with decent armor can sustain the damage from them reasonably well. It's mainly used for infantry, and thermobaric is basically going to do a decent amount of damage against infantry and buildings. They have a 300 meter range, so you have to be pretty close to get your use out of these. If you change them to the RPG-16, they do get a bit of extra range. They go to 400 meters, they get a 700 meter range sniper, or I guess designated marksman rifle if you want to be specific. And then the RPG-16 has a 700 meter range, which is actually a pretty long range for an RPG, but it only has 300 millimeters of explosive damage penetration and it can't target infantry. So that is something. Also, actually, in this loadout, it looks like they can have a laser as well. Oh, that's cool. I didn't actually realize that before. There you go. Alright, moving on to the Guards Tank Brigade. We have the grenade launchers. These grenade launchers are the best grenade launchers that the Russians can get. The AGS-40 has 40 millimeters of penetration and 2 damage, so it's 0.5 more damage than the AGS-30 and the AGS-17. So that's something to consider. Yeah, very nice squad. Then we have the Guards Modostrelki. These guys are a decent 8-man squad. The main thing that you'd use these for is for their RPG-28, which is a really nice fire and forget launcher. You can see they have 4 tubes on their backs. It doesn't mean they use all 4 at once. It usually means that they fire them and then they take 1 or 2 seconds to fire again, and then fire again, and yeah, so on and so forth. But 900 meters of explosive damage penetration is pretty good, especially considering how fast they fire. If you have a couple of these squads, they can overwhelm quite heavy tanks very easily. So, whilst also providing a decent frontline presence as well for your T-15s and the B-15s as well. Then we have the engineers. You might have seen these a lot already if you played Broken Arrow already, because they are a fantastic combination with the T-15 Barbarous. You bring them in with the Barbarous. The Barbarous can take care of any sort of light or medium targets with its 57mm autocannon, and then the engineers drop out and go and clean out the infantry from buildings for you. And the reason they're so good at doing that is because they have the KSK shotgun as well as the flashbang. And the flashbang basically stuns the enemy. I'm not entirely sure how long it lasts for, but basically allows you to win those infantry engagements, especially against units that don't have flashbangs themselves. So very, very cost efficient squad at 60 points. You can also change them to the thermobaric layout, which does give them 2 RPGs with thermobaric rockets, and these can be used for engaging infantry and light targets at range instead. Then we have the Verba. The Verba is actually a reasonably good manpad squad because it does have 2,100 meter range and 6 rounds. And ammo is one of the big things that you're going to have a problem with these kinds of squads, because quite often they'll miss. Things like, you know, everyone knows that like stingers are trash, generally speaking. And it's the same for Russian AA as well, against any sort of hard target like a Apache or a Guardian or something like that. So yeah, you got to make sure you have the ammo enough to take those down, especially if they're tanking a lot of your shots or the flares are working particularly well. So yeah. Double them up as well can work pretty nicely, but they are quite a costly manpad squad, so maybe have them in 2 separate buildings rather than the same building, just in case, you know, they get hit by a cruise missile or bombed or something like that. Anyway, motorized infantry, we have the grenade launcher with the AGS-17. So this basically has exactly the same stats as the VDV. Just bear in mind these guys have the AK-74M, which only has 1.2 damage instead of 1.5. That the VDV benefit from because of the AK-74 RMOs. So they're a little bit less light arms, but it doesn't really matter when you're engaging at 800 meters with 2 grenade launchers. Then we have the Diversanti, probably one of the most played recon squads in the game right now. You can have them in 2 loadouts. So you can have the sort of 400 meter double VSS with the 300 meter AK-15 all suppressed loadout with 2000 meter ground optics. They have the ability to laser. Pretty nice squad just for sneaking around the place. Or you can have them in the ambushes loadout, which loses the laser but gives you 4 RPG-30 fire and forget launchers. Now these RPG-30 launchers are unique because they ignore APS. So when you look at something like, let's say, the guards, they have RPG-28s. There's this stat here that says destroyed by APS and it has a plus. Well, on the Diversanti, they don't have that, which means that it can't be destroyed by APS, and therefore it gets through. Now in reality, these should technically still use up an APS charge from the unit that it's firing at, but in this game they do not, but the round will still hit regardless. 650mm of explosive damage, get one of these either side of a tank and you will make quite short work of them very, very quickly indeed, even if they do have trophy systems. Then we have the Multiplicata. These guys are an 8-man squad with AK-74s and the SVD and the PKP. You can notice that all of the damage on these infantry is much lower than the VDV. It's all 1.2 rather than 1.5. Even the SVD is 1.2. So, you know, they're overall worse, but they're useful still for their RPGs. Just because they're only 65 points, you can kind of spam these in light vehicles to overwhelm the enemy, and that would be the way to use them if you want to try them out. Then we have the PTO Metis, again suffering from the worst equipment with the AK-74M and the PKPs, but 2 Metis in this squad. Now these Metis are pretty terrible. They're only 550mm explosive damage and 800 meters range. The way that you'd use a squad like this is basically like kind of like anti-infantry in large numbers, and then if there's any like vehicles nearby, then the Metis engage those. The minimum range of the Metis is 100 meters, so the vehicle will have to get a lot closer to stop firing, and that can leave them vulnerable to other things. And there's the Cornet, which is similar to the VDV Cornet, just only have 1 rather than 2. It does mean that you are going to want to double these up, and for 90 points apiece with the Cornet M, that is quite expensive. So not a very cost-efficient squad in my opinion, but sometimes still necessary to have if you don't have another option, because the Cornet M is still the best ATGM in the game, like for the Russians at least, and it kind of is needed in positions where you need to control space and range. Then we have the Igla N. The Igla N is actually kind of interesting, the PZRK Igla N, because they have 2 launchers rather than just one. In this case, the Igla N is 1,800 meter range, but you can actually upgrade it for 10 points, which is well worth doing, to the Igla S. And the Igla S maintains the same amount of rounds, but you get an extra 200 meters of range. So that's really, really handy. So definitely upgrade this to the Igla S, and for 90 points, a pretty solid manpad squad. Then we have the Spetsnaz GRU. These guys are very much a flavor choice. I generally see like top level players play them with the anti-tank loadout, where they have 6 of these RPG-28s. This is the same launcher I pointed out that the Guardsman Ostrowski have. The reason being is they'll pair these with the SSO that we'll come to in a minute, and they'll have the SSO in close range, and then they'll have the GRU with like AT for anti-infantry or for anti-tank. And then they'll have maybe like a dedicated squad for manpads, or they'll have like a Shorad, which is like, you know, like a vehicle short-range air defense, like a Tunguska or a Panzer or something like that to back them up instead. So yeah, it really depends like what you need. I wouldn't really recommend the Verba loadout, even though it is, you know, you basically bring in like a glorified Verba squad for 135 points. Truth is, Spetsnaz GRU pretty strong. Look at the damage on their guns, like AK-15 3 damage, VSS 4.5 damage. It's like such a huge upgrade on something like a Motobokata. So they can fight very well even at close range, but it just depends kind of what loadout you are. I think either the shared loadout of both the Verba and the RPG-28 is useful, or just the RPG-28 on its own, and then you supplement for your anti-air. Then we have the SSO. Really, really good, strong close range infantry. Better than the engineers, again, because of damage on those guns. So they have the RPK 16 PPS as well, which has 4.5 damage. They got the Burr thermobaric launcher as well as flashbangs. So not only can they deal a lot of damage to infantry outside of buildings, they can also, of course, clean out the building that they are in. There is a standoff loadout for the SSO, and I have seen this being used to some good effect on like a map like Kaliningrad, where you're not often like diving infantry because you have that sort of river that cuts you off. So instead, you have these at long range engagement, and you're utilizing this Cornet M to snipe light vehicles and enemy infantry at range. And if a enemy infantry gets caught out in the open and hit by one of these, it does a lot of damage, because this is in fact a HE missile. It's not like your other Cornet M, which has like 1,200 millimeters of penetration. You can see this one only has 150, but it has 15 damage. So yeah, if this hits a vehicle, it can do some serious damage if it doesn't have much armor. So that's kind of like where I would use that, but most of the time I'm using them in the close quarters loadout. Moving on to the coastal troops, we have the Chinya Beretti. These guys I thought were not very good initially, but I have kind of come around to it a little bit. When you're using coastal in your battle group, it can be handy to have these guys around, just because they still have a lot of damage on their guns. They have the AN-94 and then the grenade launcher there, and these guns have 3 damage each, so that's definitely going to outmatch like anything that's like not a special forces squad. And they've also got 5 thermobaric shots on them as well. So yeah, decent, especially if you double them up for just cleaning out infantry with them. Still going to be effective in that loadout. There's also the loadout with the grenade launcher, but they do get the PKPM, which doesn't really match up to the same damage as their AN-94s. And the grenade launcher is the 1.5 damage one with 30 mils of penetration instead of the 40 mil penetration with 2 damage. So yeah, not a huge fan of the grenade launcher loadout, but the thermobaric loadout for just cleaning people out is pretty nice. Then we have the Guanostrauki, a pretty good squad for engaging at 400 meters. Because the SVDs are going to ignore cover there, they provide a little bit of extra suppression. They're a squad that would do well supporting other squads at range. So in a situation where maybe you dive the enemy with like 2 Morskaya Pokota, and then you have like 1 Guanostrauki kind of maintaining range while the Morskaya Pokota push, that's kind of the situation where these would be useful, especially considering they are armed with a Metis that can engage vehicles at 800 meters of range. Then we have the Morskaya Pechota, probably one of my favorite infantry on the Russian side because they have pretty good weapons, like the AK-74 RMO with the 1.5 damage and the RPK-74M with the 2.25 damage. They've got two of those. So they are like a better than normal infantry squad. And they also have the RPG-27, which is pretty fast firing with 650mm of explosive damage against tanks. So quite often you'll see me with BTR-80s, for example, just like running at the enemy and dropping off one of these either side of an enemy heavy tank, and they can actually take them out. So that is something to be wary of, and that whilst also being able to engage most like enemy infantry well at range. So, you know, these can clean out one of those support squads that would be annoying normally. Things like, you know, sort of cat dragon teams, or like something like toad teams, you know, all the sort of random like manpad squads. They're going to make short work of those. Then we have the Morskaya used much like the Morskaya Pechota. You just got to bear in mind that they are shorter range, but they do have a lot of damage again. Like AK-103 is 2.5 damage and the RPK-74 is 3.75 damage. So, you know, within range, they're going to really do a lot of work. And if you, again, double them up for the 140 points, you're going to be having a great time at close range against enemy infantry. They also have the RPG-27. They don't have as many rounds as the Morskaya Pechota, but they are a recon squad primarily. So yeah, good for kind of cleaning out areas when you want to try and push forwards on the edges of the map. If you happen to bump into a vehicle, you can sometimes take it out as well. They do have the 2.5 stealth, which is really, really handy, and 1,750 meters optics, which does increase, of course, if you get to low altitude range. Then we have the PDSS. Interesting squad, very niche squad. Not many uses for it. Generally, like, they're good on maps which have rivers where you want to try and get into positions that would usually not be covered. There's like on Cold Harbor, you can technically like run one of these all the way around the edge of the map because you can swim through the water. With these, they are amphibious, but they don't really pack much of a punch. I mean, in numbers they can, but the ADS only has 1.8 damage, which is actually kind of lackluster for a Special Forces squad. And the grenade launcher is not that great. The grenade launcher loadout as well that you can use, it just doesn't really fire fast enough to be effective. So yeah, not really sure like if I should recommend these or not, but they are fun to use on the flanks and can get themselves into positions where this optics, which is the same as a sniper, can be extremely useful. You've got to use them basically as like hold fire recon squads, rather than the, you know, engaging enemy infantry with them on purpose. Then we have the PTRK Conkers. Unfortunately, just not very good compared to everything I've shown you so far, like all of the Metis, not the Metis, the Cornets. The Conker's M is okay, 750mm of explosive damage, and you do get 6 rounds, but yeah, it's more just like, do you have spare points? If yes, put these in a building for 60 points to try and overwhelm enemy APS. I guess like 750mm of explosive damage plus 17 damage is still going to deal with like medium and light targets relatively well for you. And for 60 points, it could be worth it. Spetsnaz VMF, 80-point squad. They are okay. Again, the ADS just kind of struggles. Like a 1.8 damage, it's not ideal. And then the SVU AS, like again, if you compare it to like the Chenye where they get 3 damage on their AN-94 at 400 meters range, and then you look at the Spetsnaz which has 400 meter range with 1.8 damage, it's not great. So they can be sneaky, you know, they can get you into position where they can use a laser for you and stuff like that. And they will be able to fight off like basic infantry, but if they come up against other special forces, they're going to have a hard time. The fire support loadout is really cool, but very expensive. Like this double like anti-material rifle setup is so awesome to use. It's just such a huge target. You know, as soon as somebody sees these firing, you're going to get bombed, you're going to get like helicopters running you down. basically everyone and their nan's going to be coming for you because it costs 150 points, and that's an easy kill for a 6-man squad. So yeah, you got to be real careful about how you use these, but they can be very effective. Extremely expensive, will affect your income quite a lot. I'm not sure how I feel about them. Like on their own, if you ignore the cost, extremely effective squad. If you include the cost, it's like borderline. SPG's 9 Sapog, interesting squad for 60 points. They can engage both infantry and vehicles, so they do have 300mm of explosive penetration against vehicles. They're limited to 1000 meter range. In groups, they can tear through infantry quite nicely. Mechanized infantry. Alright, Modostralki. So again, kind of stuck with the bad guns, the AK-74M and the RPK-74M. The RPK-74M is better than the PKP than the Motopakata get, so slightly better squad in terms of light arms. They do get the RPG-26, which is not as good as something like the Moskaya Pakata, because you've only got 450mm of explosive damage. But I think actually even the damage is actually lower, interestingly enough, than the RPG-27. So yeah, the launcher is suspect, but it can still overwhelm in large numbers, and for 60 points they're extremely cheap. Then we have the Modostralki Igla, a squad that's good for engaging enemy infantry whilst also having like an Igla ready. Nice thing about the squad is whilst it does have a low range, it does have 6 rounds, so that is very handy. Like the extra ammo here makes so much difference. Then we have the Ukhdemachiki. Some people I've heard don't like these squads, but honestly they are very good. Just like the flash launcher on the Green Berets, which we'll come to later, the Borodach Incendiary is very, very good. It basically leaves flames on the floor that burn infantry over time, and if a unit's like in a building, it will burn them over time in the building. So yeah, really, really solid with the MRO-Z. You have these just drop out in pairs out of something like the BMO that you can see in the background of the portrait there. You can even like put them in, I don't know, basically whatever combination you have. You can put them in boomerangs, you can put them in, you know, and basically remember that any infantry can be in any transport. And because they're only a 4-man squad, they can fit 2 in any 8-man transport, which is really, really nice. And you can just like drop them on top of enemy infantry. The RPO-M is okay, and it does quite a decent amount of damage at range, but because it's only a 4-man squad, they do suffer in that situation, whereas at least the flames kind of panic and stun the enemy infantry and burn them over time, so that even if the infantry dies, you still get the effectiveness of the 50 points. Then we have the Fargo. This is a 2-man squad, or sorry, not a 2-man squad, it's a 7-man squad with 2 ATGMs, which have 450mm of explosive damage. Honestly, spamming these around can work pretty nicely. Because they're so cheap, it makes it very difficult for the enemy to be cost efficient against them, because this ATGM actually does kill light and medium armor very quickly, especially since there's 2 of them. Even if the enemy has APS, you're still going to be able to get some damage in. The Factoria is the same, but with slightly more range and also more penetration. So you got the 550mm of explosive damage there, and the 11 damage compared to the 10 damage, 450mm explosive damage, and you see the range there. So Factoria is slightly better, but for what its role is, for 50 points, I think you might as well stick with the cheaper variant. Ulamachiki, PKP, they're okay. Their damage is still quite low, honestly, because they're using AK-74Ms and PKPs. They have the RPG-26, so, you know, fire and forget, pretty quick at killing like light targets, but you might want to think about upgrading these to the Cord, because then the Cord's getting that 2 damage, 800 meter range, and you kind of use them more of like a standoff if anything comes close than the RPG-26 can fire. The thing I don't like about the Pulamachiki Cord generally is their low ammo on their launchers. Otherwise, they'll be a lot more useful. Then we have the standard Razvedka. Razvedka do get 2 damage AKM PBSs, which is interesting, and then they get an SVD. They get 3 RPG-26s for 50 points. Pretty good value squad. It's kind of like I was saying with the Moscow Razvedka, using these in pairs and sort of pushing them around the edges of the maps is a pretty nice way to use these. I mean, even just like using them in pairs and moving them up the middle of the map is kind of nice because, again, they're pretty good value and they can deal with enemy infantry quite well due to their decent damage on their guns. Then we have the RPG-27 Vampire. This is a squad that comes with 2 RPG-29s. These are reasonably good damage, like 9 damage, 650mm explosive penetration. The way to use these is to kind of dump one, again, either side of a tank, and then because you have 2 launchers, they fire that extra time, or extra like quickly, basically. They're not as good as something like the Rangers Moors, but they are the closest equivalent to them on the Russian side of things. So that's something to bear in mind. Then we have the Sturmoviki. Pretty okay squad because of the double like thermobaric. You want to use these as like a standoff against enemy infantry and then just utilize that 600-meter range to just keep launching 40mm HE rockets at them through the RPG. That's the way you got to use them. Getting them too close will get them killed because they are not specialized at close quarters. They do not have shotguns. They do not have flashbangs. So do bear that in mind. I do see people like kind of dive on infantry with these because they confuse them with the standard engineers. They do look very similar, but they don't have the same close range capability. Then we have the sniper. So mechanized sniper, again, just standard 2,000 meter range sniper squad with laser capability. You can upgrade it to have an anti-material rifle for 15 points, kind of up to you if you think it's worth it. Generally, you're not going to be using the sniper because you want to keep it hidden. So I like to keep it as cheap as possible, personally. Alright, moving on to the Americans. We have ourselves the Assaultmen S'more. A really interesting squad, which I think is valuable to be used in both loadouts. The Assaultmen S'more loadout is good for engaging both enemy infantry as well as tanks because it just does have anti-tank rounds, which have 600mm of explosive penetration, which is pretty good. So don't underestimate these for killing enemy vehicles, as well as being able to engage infantry at range. They do only have the M16A4, which is a 1.2 damage gun, so on the low end. But otherwise, yeah, really, really nice support unit. Then we have the Cat Dragon. So the Cat Dragon, I haven't quite landed on whether or not I like these guys yet. For 110 points, it seems very expensive. They get the M240, which has 1.5 damage, and then the Browning has 2 damage. Obviously, it gets the penetration as well there, which is good for engaging enemy vehicles. But yeah, their base gun being the M16 is kind of a letdown. And the Dragon 3, it's only got 1,000 meter range with 750mm of explosive damage penetration. So getting this into the right position to actually do damage is really tough because the only time that's going to happen is like in an urban environment. And then there's going to be plenty of places where vehicles can duck and cover. And so almost never hitting the mark. And even if you do get close, they're going to smoke. And that's why it becomes a problem. Cat Javelin, however, maybe a bit more use case with the 1,300 meter range, a bit more standoff. And then if infantry is getting close, you do have the M27 IAR, which is a nice upgrade on their weapons. They get the M270 to match the damage and the M2 Browning. So going to be able to clean enemy infantry a bit better with these. And you have a longer range, but you do have a limited amount of ammo on the Javelin, which is a problem with the Javelin in this game in general. It's like just the lack of ammo. Cat Tow 2. I have started to enjoy using the Tow a lot more, but not as part of this squad. The Tow 2, the benefit of it is its extreme range and penetration. Like 900mm of penetration is really good, and 1,600 meter range is just great for controlling open areas. So in theory, this is a nice squad, but because it only fires one at a time, you're never going to overwhelm APS with this. When you do get through APS, you're going to be smoked. When you get through both smoke and APS, they're going to be knowing it's there already and it's probably dead. So for 110 points, not really worth it. The Overfly version, just a more expensive punching bag. So I wouldn't really recommend these teams, generally speaking. There may be a time when your Tow 2B is breaking through APS, or maybe your opponent doesn't bring APS, and then it feels like these are a good value. But at high level, these are not going to ever give you the 140 points of value as advertised. Then we have the Force Recon. Force Recon are good in 2 loadouts. Honestly, like both of their loadouts is good. So they have the M27 and the M38 DMR, which gives them a decent amount of damage. So these are 2.25 damage, these are 1.5 damage. Then you've got the AT4 as well. So I have used these in like meme decks as my frontline infantry, and they can work out pretty well in that role to take care of like light and medium armor because of the AT4, whilst also being able to hold at a range. But the Black Ops loadout is also really strong, particularly in forests. So if you're using them more as like a generic recon squad and you're kind of cleaning through forests, then these shotguns can be really, really handy. They still have the lore here, which also can engage infantry. So yeah, pretty nice loadout. I mean, these have 4.8 damage, these have 2.5 damage, and this is like why shotguns rip through enemy infantry so easily, because of that high damage, if you were wondering. But yeah, 6-man squad, pretty solid in both loadouts. I like the Force Recon in the close range loadout though. They're very cheap and good value for that. Then we have the Marine Raiders. So the Marine Raider CQC is okay. Like if you use them in an Amtrak and you just like unload them on the enemy, then it can work out quite nicely because the shotguns will tear enemy infantry to pieces. But the thing that I don't like about this squad is they don't really excel at close range, because they will be defeated by units like SSO or engineers that have flashbangs, because they don't have their own flashbang. So the ideal range for these really is 200 meters, where they can use their shotguns as well as the grenade launcher and lore. And that basically demotes them to being only really good in forests. So yeah, if you're playing on a forested map and you have a deck with these in, then sure, they're going to do great. But I think like in urban environments, you're generally going to get outclassed by units with flashbangs. Whereas the standoff loadout is, I think, generally always useful. It's a pretty solid squad. You get a lot of men with decent damage. I mean, you at least get the 1.5 damage on the M27. But I kind of feel like they should have a better gun with higher damage, but it is what it is. And then they have the Moors there, which is a really strong AT weapon with 600mm explosive damage. It fires very quickly. You have 8 of them in the squad. So, yeah. It's okay. It's okay. The trouble I find with the Marine Raiders, generally speaking, is, again, they become a big target to get rid of. And they don't really do that well. Like they're not too specialized enough. It's not like their standoff engagement is like crazy. And it's not like their close range engagement is useful in like every situation either. So yeah, a bit of a lackluster squad overall for their price, but still good meat for the front line. Speaking of meat for the front line, Marines. Marines are very good meat for the front line because, like the Marine Raiders, they have the M27 IAR, and that means they all have 1.5 damage. They also have some grenade launchers, and they have 6 AT4s, which is pretty nice. So really solid meat grinder for 95 points. Then we have the reservists, which are not really worth it at all. They have bag guns, M16s. They do get grenade launchers still, but yeah. Anti-infantry spam in a pinch, but otherwise just stick to the normal Marines. We have the Scout Snipers. Scout Snipers are okay for 75 points. They do get 3 stealth, like most snipers, and the 2000 optics. So yeah, this is basically just a standard sniper squad that you want to keep on hold fire and try and get into the rear of your enemy just to give yourself information. Again, you have the option of upgrading to the anti-material rifle, but this would only be good in situations where you're keeping them behind your standard infantry line to, you know, get use out of that 1,200 meter range. Then we move on to the Armour Brigade. So they have the Cavalry Scouts here. Cavalry Scouts, they do bring in a Javelin. I think it'd be nicer if they had the 1,500 meter range Javelin, just because they're only a 3-man squad. Because what usually happens here is these will fire, they'll get spotted, and then they die pretty quickly because it's only a 3-man squad. They do have very good stealth. Not the best stealth, but still very decent at 2.5, and then 1,750 optics. In support of other squads, you could argue that they're going to do okay. When you have like multiple squads in the same building, and then like a cavalry scout as well, the other units in the building can absorb damage for the cavalry scout. So you can kind of cheese it a little bit, but otherwise for 85 points, I feel like they're a little bit overpriced. Then we have the mech engineers. For 50 points, having 5 small D rounds is very nice, plus 2 shotguns. I like to double these up in AMPVs and drop them in the face of the enemy. They're not going to do too well at like close range in buildings, fighting other units in buildings, because again they don't have flashbangs, so they will be outclassed by things like SSO and engineers on the side of the Russians. But the mech engineers are pretty good at killing things through forests, and they can also fight at close range against units that don't have close range sort of weapons with the shotguns here. So you just got to use them situationally, but otherwise very good value for money. Mech Riflemen, again, really good value for money squad. They do have kind of shoddy weapons with the M4A1. I hate saying that because I like these guns a lot. You know, I've used them in a lot of like COD games and stuff, and they're always like the standard M16 and M4s always do well for you. But in like Broken Arrow, the 1.2 damage means that they are on the low end. The M249 has 1.8 damage, which is okay. But yeah, Mech Rifle, the reason they're good is because they come with 4 AT launchers, which is actually pretty good for a 50-point squad. Then we have the Mech Rifleman AA. These guys have the standard FIM-92F Stinger, which only has 1,800 meter range. Not very good for a man-pad squad, again lacking in ammo, so anything below 6 is not great. 6-man squad though does make them a little bit harder to kill potentially, but yeah, overall not the best. Mech Rifleman MMG, never really could make them work. Like their machine guns are kind of low on damage, they only get 2 AT weapons. I think this is kind of like as bad as it gets for a 50-point squad. So yeah, much prefer the Mech Rifleman over the Mech Rifleman MMG. Then we have the Airborne with the new next generation weapon system. So these guys are really solid at range. You know, at 600 meters, they're going to be able to like pick away at enemy infantry. But one thing that people don't realize is that this assault rifle, the M7 Spear, only has 1.1 damage. That is lower than like basically any other gun in the game. So whilst they do have the extra range, their damage is very low. Same with the LMG. It's like the lowest damage LMG in terms of like the lowest damage you can get on an LMG I think is 1.5. So even though this is like a next generation weapon, it's still very low on damage. So yeah, not ideal, but they do get the Moors, which again is a pretty solid AT weapon. So if you're using them in support of other squads, then it's okay. Using them on their own is not ideal. Now the standard loadout, interestingly enough, on the Airborne is like better at 400 meters range than the next generation weapon systems. So bear in mind these are like, you know, 1.1 damage. I guess you got to like bear in mind dispersion and stuff as well. But I don't think that it's that different. Let me just check this. So I've kind of been playing with both of these for a long time now. So you've got 600 meters effective range, 400 meters effective range, 1.1 damage, 1.5 damage. Now the penetration is technically higher, right? So in theory, if a unit has more armor, then the penetration will help. Because I guess if it's like, I don't know if this means like 8 millimeters of armor, and then it would mean that you're doing like maybe half as much damage with this as you are with this. But yeah, either way, the numbers are kind of weird here, and I feel like the next generation weapon should have a bit more damage. So anyway, just a heads up on that. They are good at 600 meters, but if the enemy gets in range, you're going to lose. Like if an enemy, like I've seen Morskaya Pekota, which is like the 70 point coastal troop, defeat an 85 point next generation weapon airborne, you know, at 400 meters. So yeah. Anyway, moving on. Airborne snipers. Another sniper squad you just want to keep on hold fire with its high stealth. Do have a laser for you. and there is the anti-material rifle version, but for 100 points is a bit risky to use. Then we've got the HMG team. Now HMG teams, I think for 50 points, a HMG team is good value. It just kind of depends why or when you're using them. Like, there are a lot of cases where if you're engaging infantry, just use grenade launchers. But there are some situations where you might be engaging infantry and helicopters, and in that case, having the M2 Browning is actually useful. So in my Humvee deck, where I'm like diving into the back line, yeah, I might bump into infantry, but I also am more likely to actually bump into helicopters. And the 50 cal can actually shoot at helicopters while the grenade launcher cannot. There are some grenade launchers that can, but it obviously depends on the battle group that you're running. Now, speaking of grenade launchers, we have the Mark 19 here. This is a pretty good grenade launcher. It's the best one for the American side because it has 40mm of explosive damage, and it's 2 damage. So it's 40mm of penetration and then 2 damage. So yeah, pretty solid squad for 60 points. Then we also have the Stinger team, which is another decent squad because you have 2 launchers. Unfortunately, you can't upgrade these to have like 2,000 meter range or something like you can with the Russian ones, but yeah, 2 Stingers is still good, and you get 6 rounds. They do get through them pretty quickly, so make sure you keep them resupplied. Then we have the TOW 2A squad. Now this is where TOWs actually get useful, because where before you were using like a Cat Saber, like with the TOW 2A, and it's 110 points, now you're getting a TOW 2A for 65 points. And that means you can double these up for like 130 points, and you're going to be able to defeat APS, which means like always one of these 12 damage 900mm for penetration is going to get through, and that is very, very useful. So for controlling longer range engagements, TOW 2A, really nice choice. Weapon squad, I just find javelins so inconsistent that weapon squads, I don't enjoy them too much at the moment. I think they can have a place, but for 125 points, it's just so expensive. For 900 or for 750mm explosive damage, of course, you're top attacking the enemy. So it really just depends on APS. I don't think that both the javelins fire like together. If they did, this squad would be 100 times better. They kind of fire intermittently, which kind of gives your opponent more time to react with smoke. Then we have the combat engineers. A really solid squad, especially if you're like hot dropping them with a striker. You can get them to the front line very quickly, and then they can overwhelm the enemy with their shotguns and also the small D. So these are going to be good for like breaching enemies at close range. They're also pretty good at like standoff. So if you're running through a forest, you can clean out infantry with these pretty well because of the 200 meter range, effective range on the shotgun. So yeah, for really solid squad for 90, or so for 80 points. Then we have the scouts. So unfortunately, like a lot of the recon small squads, apart from the special forces or operations forces, are kind of trashy in the American side. It's not like where you have on the Russian side, you got like Moskva, Razvedka, which are going to absolutely slap at close range due to their like 3.75 damage RPK 74s and the 1.3 or 2.5 damage AK-103. Instead, you get like scouts, which have like no damage on the M4s and the 1.8 damage on the M249. You do get 3 launches, but yeah, these should probably be like 50 points. Troopers, they're okay in large numbers. If you have like 2 or 3 of these stacked, then you can get some work done, because then you're having 9 AT4s and 3 javelins all firing at the same time, which really can overwhelm enemy APS. But of course, for 90 points apiece, it can get quite costly. So, you know, the other side of this though is if you think of like a T90M Arena or like even a Barbaros is over 400 points. So stacking 3 of these for like 270 points is not that big a deal in that situation if you are guaranteed a kill with the AT4s and javelins. So yeah, there is an argument to be made there. Regardless, their base weapons are kind of trash, but if you bring them in teams of like 2 or 3, then the AT4s and javelins really start to like make their money back, and then you can just kind of retreat them, get them reloaded, send them to the front line again. We got the Troopers AA, another kind of mediocre manpad squad. It's a nice manpad squad because it's so many men, but yeah, the Stinger's only got 1,800 meter range, so that makes them less ideal. For 90 points, it's quite expensive for, you know, if you're using them primarily as a manpad. Right, moving on to the Special Operations Forces, leaving the best till last, I suppose. We have the Delta Force. So the Delta Force, the best close-range infantry squad in the game, in the CQC loadout, because they are a 12-man squad with flashbang. There is no squad that is bigger than them with a flashbang. So yeah, they have the HK 416, which has 3 damage. They got the Mark 46, which has 4.5 damage, and the shotgun, which is 4.8 damage. Nothing beats this. Even at like, you know, in the forest, they're still going to absolutely slap any infantry about. In the open, though, they're going to get mowed down. So do bear that in mind. But you do have the standoff loadout, which is also very good, because you get 600 meter weapons that instead of having 1.1 damage have 1.35 damage. You got the MRGG, which is 1.8, the CAC AMG, which has 1.8. So the damage is not as great as something like the Russians when they get close range, but it does certainly pack a punch at 600 to 700 meter range, this Delta Force. Also, the Fletcher can kill light vehicles. 70 millimeters of penetration is actually okay for getting through quite a lot of things. So yeah, Delta Force at standoff, probably easier to use, and I think more people's favorite, I would say. But CQC loadout, incredibly strong, and do not overlook them. It's just kind of difficult sometimes to get them on the front line because you need to use a Warpig or a like an AMPV, and the AMPV is slow, whilst the Warpig is like very easy to kill. So their transports are kind of lackluster compared to what the Russians can get, because, for example, an SSO squad can be brought in a boomerang or something and just like unloaded on your face really fast with a decent decent sort of backup. Also, like engineers coming in with Barbarous and dropping on your face, whereas the closest you get was the MPV with these, and that's kind of the equivalent of like the Barbarous engineer combo. It's just you're putting more eggs in the infantry basket. So yeah, either way, really solid squad. Green Berets, really cool squad. So I've seen these used in all of their loadouts, and that just tells you that this is a cool squad. The Punisher is airburst. It can shoot down helicopters using that grenade launcher. It's basically like an airburst grenade launcher that they have. I've seen like higher level players use these doubled up to kind of infiltrate the back line and then take out, you know, specific vehicles with that Punisher. There's also the flash launcher, which is really cool. I've used it to like camp spawns before by just like laying down like incendiary on the spawn, but most of the time these are really good use for like supporting your infantry on the front line, just like burning every building you see. If they run out of the building, you can burn behind the building. And they have 100% ignore cover on this, so that is something to bear in mind. Also, if you come up against enemy infantry, the M202 flash, if you manually fire it, can burn vehicles. So do bear that in mind as well. Then we have the Green Beret Sniper. I think the Green Beret Sniper, the main use for this is that they get 2000 optics, which I think is the only unit for the Special Operations Forces. Like I say, Special Forces Striker is a good combination. But like Special Force or Striker doesn't get any 2000 optics, and neither does Special Operations Forces unless you bring the Green Beret Snipers. So that is why you would bring them, and then you can benefit from the 2500 meter range. Otherwise, you kind of want to keep them on hold fire because they only get one anti-material rifle, so it's not like you're going to be able to do lots of damage with them very quickly. Okay, Pararescue. This is an interesting one because originally I was very much in the special tactics team boat of, oh yeah, I love this long range loadout, it's doing so much work for me. At 600 meters range against enemy infantry, whilst also providing a Stinger, so like a glorified manpad squad, 2000 meter range. But I actually prefer the Pararescue team now. I mean, both are good, don't get me wrong, the special tactics teams are still pretty strong, But Pararescue are very, very good because they're kind of like mini Delta Force. You know, you've got half the amount of men, but you still got flashbangs, you still got shotguns, and to look at the damage on the Mark 46, you've got 2 Mark 46s with 4.5 damage, you've got 2 shotguns with 4.8 damage, 4 HK 416s with 3 damage. So you're basically like literally half a Delta Squad with a flashbang. And flashbangs are the key. They are what help you win those, like when you jump into the same building as an enemy, the flashbangs are what do the work for you. So yeah, really decent squad, honestly. Then we have the Rangers. So Rangers are actually just a bajillion times better than Airborne because their weapons actually do damage. So 400 meters, they got 1.5 damage on their M4A1. They got 2.25 damage on the M249. They also have the Scar H, which ignores cover. And the DMRs make such a difference because they help pin infantry quicker, which is a reason why like using Gonos in support is really, really nice on the side of the Russians, because the SVD is a DMR and it just allows you to suppress the enemy faster. And because the enemy's suppressed, they do less damage, and then it kind of snowballs into a victory for your infantry. They also get a Roars, which is 450mm penetration. Pretty nice. 9-man squad. Chunky boys. There is a close quarters loadout. Not that useful. They will win in forests. They do have a lot of damage. But, yeah, there's just better options for close range, I think, rather than the Rangers. Like, the Rangers are really good, but in close quarters against infantry, but standoff's just more useful, I think, overall. Then we have the Mark 47 grenade launcher. The Special Forces grenade launcher is really, really good. 800 meter range, 2 damage, 40mm explosive damage, but also can target helicopters at 800 meters range. So, yeah, just a no-brainer, really. Make sure whenever you're bringing in Special Forces vehicles that you use these grenade launchers as well, because they're really strong. So yeah, anyway, solid squad. Rangers Roars. These guys are potentially the best AT in the game, at least close range AT, because they have 3 launchers. And in this case, they have 18 rounds on the Roars. I think they had the same on the Moors. The Moors is always going to be like a better choice because of the increased penetration, which is going to allow you to kill things like Barbarous and Kurganits very easily if you drop one either side. Now, the biggest mistake I see people make with these is just trying to fire into the front armor. It's the same goes for like any of these, like 84, even like the RPGs on the Russian side. They're not going to do much damage to the front armor. Like ATGMs might, but not rockets. So yeah, make sure you get on the flanks, shoot them in the sides, even use them to like support tanks. So like a tank's having a frontal engagement with another tank, and then you just have a Rangers on the side, you know, shooting into the side of it. Either the tank's got to like turn to face the rockets, or it's got to turn to face the tank, and either way it's going to take more damage regardless. So that's kind of how you get value out of these squads. And a couple of these hot dropped on a tank is good value if you manage to kill it. A Barbarous, a T90, a T14, things like that. That's what they're really good for. Then we have the Rangers RRC. The Rangers RRC, they're okay. This is the close quarters loadout for them, which is interesting because the close quarters loadout, it does have a lot of damage at 300 meter range. But they still have an 84, so you know they can deal with enemy infantry quite nicely, especially like standard infantry like a Motostrałki or like even the Gornostrałki, Motopokota. There's quite a lot of infantry here that they would win against, but they have an 84, not like a small D or something like that, which would really help them like win those engagements quicker. There is a standoff engagement which has the Scars, so these are now looking at like 400-500 meter range, and 1.35 damage is nice. 1.8 damage is okay. I mean, like, one thing that really lets me down about all of this American infantry is like their standoff loadouts are always like low damage. When you feel like the Scar H, that's got a pretty hefty round in it. Like, surely that should be doing more than 1.35 damage. Regardless, they do get a Moors in this loadout, which is nice. So they're kind of like a supplementary AT squad for your guys, and you know, for 80 points, it's not too bad, considering they can still engage relatively well at long range. But yeah, the close range loadout for these is actually not a bad idea either, just because it means that the AT4 is still going to be doing a decent amount of penetration, whilst also being hard to dislodge by enemy infantry. Then we have the Ranger Snipers. We have the suppressed loadout here, which is useful. 2,000 meter optics, 3 stealth, 3-man squad is actually kind of nice, because in situations where you get found, sometimes you have a chance to get away from like enemy artillery because there's always 1 man left. Whereas if it's like a 2-man squad, quite often they'll just get flattened by like the first round. But there is the Ranger Snipers with the anti-material rifle. Now the interesting thing about these guys is they actually have AT launchers. So, you know, in a situation where you get to the backline, you need to ambush something, these can be a great choice. Much more so than a lot of the other options that have anti-material rifles, just because of these 2 extra AT4s that they have. Bear in mind, it is only 2, and they use them up very quickly. Ranger Stingers, pretty good, because they have a 2,000 meter range Stinger, but only 4 ammo. They can be changed, interestingly, from a man-pad squad to a Javelin squad. Now this Javelin is actually very good, because it has 1,500 meters range with 750 millimeters explosive damage. It's a very, very nice Javelin because of that extra range, and it's quite a popular squad to use. I think both loadouts are viable for the Rangers, because there are situations, depending on the battle group combinations that you're using, that you'll need the Stingers or you'll need the Javelins. So yeah, there you go. That's all of the infantry in Broken Arrow currently, and my thoughts and opinions on how to use them and whether or not I think they are worth it. Hopefully that's helped you out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.